Welcome to Week 2 of the President's Athletic Conference Football Focus. I'm Waynesburg University senior Andy Stanko, and this week the focus shifts to Bethany, West Virginia, and the Bethany College Bison. The Bison finished directly in the middle of the PAC with a 5-5 record in 2015. Bethany moved to 1-0 in the season with a 23-13 win over Ursinus College, thanks to 7 takeaways by the Bison defense. Up next for the Bison is a non-conference matchup with fellow PAC member Geneva in Week 2. Each week, the PAC Football Focus features one team from around the conference. We'll take a look into the program and highlight Saturday's matchups to get you ready for the weekend. Stay tuned following the Football Focus. 2 other Waynesburg University students and I will bring you the PAC Pregame Show, where we'll react to Week 1 and break down all 5 matchups involving PAC teams in Week 2. Coach Bill Garvey enters his 4th year as the head man at Bethany College after spending 7 seasons as the Bison's offensive coordinator. Coach Garvey inherited a program that finished under 500 in PAC play in 10 of the previous 11 seasons before Garvey took over. In the last 3 seasons, the Bison have finished 4-4, 5-3, and 4-4 in conference play. In 2014, Garvey led the program to its first postseason appearance since 1980. The turnaround at Bethany has been a long time coming for Coach Garvey.
And I got here 11 years ago, and this was, as you know, to me as a football program, probably as bad as it got. I was just an assistant then, and it took a while now. You know, Division III, I think, you know, everybody thinks football is football. Well, we don't have scholarships, and you can't just say, oh, we'll turn. You know, everyone says, oh, you get 5 years to turn a program around. Well, at Division III, I think it does honestly probably take a little bit longer than that, because you do lose some guys, and there's just reasons why you lose them from, you know, financial reasons, social reasons. It definitely took some time, but probably the last 5 or 6 years, even before I became the head coach, you know, the program was competitive, you know, and now the last probably 3 years for sure, you know, we're not the same team that we used to be, getting beat by 20, 21.
2 of the biggest reasons that the Bison have been so competitive over the last few seasons are now graduates of Bethany College, and Coach Garvey has to find ways to replace the production and leadership of wide receiver Eric Blinn and defensive lineman Nadeem Radar.
Yeah, it's been, it was definitely different, you know, definitely different. Definitely looking around and going, you know, who's going to take their spot? No question. Now we think we're pretty talented, you know, in some spots, but again, those guys played so much football for us at such a high level for such a long time. You know, honestly, you never feel great about it, but you know, I mean, we got a wide out in Tyler Ambush, who's, you know, been in the program now 3 years, and you know, has had, I think, twice or, you know, over 30 catches and everything. Just, you know, I mean, to me, he's probably one of the more talented wideouts in this conference. Just everything we did, like everybody knew, went through Eric, you know. So, you know, he was just 30 catches, 35, something like that, you know, basically his whole career, you know, but a big play guy, you know, who we would get the ball to, you know, quite a bit, and was always up there in our team in touchdowns because everybody was so concerned with number 4 on the other side. So a lot of the times he found himself in some single coverage and in those types of situations, and did a real nice job. Now it's his time. And defensive end, again, we're just a younger group, and I think it's going to be probably a lot more by committee of that group. I think they're talented. I don't know if there's any Nadeem Radars in there. I don't know, you know, obviously if there's too many of those guys in the country, but again, you know, we think we're talented. We just got to prove that now. So we shall see, but definitely a different feeling without those guys, and that entire senior class total, to be quite honest with you. I mean, they played a lot of meaningful football for us, for sure.
In terms of leadership, Coach Garvey points to his defense, especially returning all-conference defensive back and punter Aaron Fry.
I mean, he is our leader of our football team, no question about it. I mean, just as our leader. But a steady player who's played, this will be his 4th year starting. I mean, he walked in the door, was a starter. Basically, as a sophomore, he's taking grad credits right now. We're lucky enough that he wanted to do that and get his master's here, because again, his freshman year he attended classes, but 2 days before camp had emergency appendectomy surgery, so it knocked him out for that whole year. He decided that he wants to get his master's, and we have a master's program here now that we've had for like the last 7 years or so. So he's doing that, and on defense as well, Donovan Hayden, who's a senior linebacker, who's as a dynamic defensive player as there is in the league. So those guys are the guys going to be on offense, and then our young D line. It's definitely a younger group, but Daniel Gibson's going to be the leader of that group for sure. And he's just a sophomore.
Offensively, the Bison are starting their fourth different quarterback in as many seasons under Coach Garvey in a conference that typically doesn't take kindly to first-year starters.
But it is difficult, certainly with the quarterback situation. We lost Mac Ramard, and in today's day and age, it's hard to recruit kids when you had a 4-year starter there. And we've thought we've had a couple kids in the program from a recruiting standpoint, and some things didn't work out. So, again, and it doesn't say anything against the quarterbacks that we've had. I think they're all good players the last 2 years, but we haven't been from a recruiting standpoint really probably solid there to say we got a young guy in the program that we're going to go with and move forward. Again, we think we got some pretty good ones right now in the freshman class, but to play quarterback as a freshman is hard, So we are, we played a freshman a little bit, got a series, and we'll continue probably to move that forward as we see fit throughout the season.
Coach Garvey knows that having a 1,300-yard rusher from last season in Jalen Holmes certainly bolsters the offense and helps a new quarterback get comfortable.
No question, huge, right? I mean, it's if you got someone that you can hand the ball to and he can just grind out yards for you, and you have that confidence that you can hand him the ball and go get yards. I mean, it's a much nicer feeling, certainly from a play calling standpoint, and certainly for whoever the quarterback is right now. Most of the time, Chase, it's just a good, nice security blanket that way. That you got a guy who's one of the best tailbacks in the conference, and certainly one of the best tailbacks that's been here at Bethany since he broke the single season rushing record last year. So, it's huge for us to have him back.
The man under center to start 2016 is junior Chase Keany, who played well when it counted against Ursinus College in Week 1.
He's just consistent, and he's been, he's been a quarterback now basically, for a full year in the system, and went through the spring. So, he's steady would be a really good word for him in description right now. He usually knows pretty much where to go with the ball. He had made one, not great throw and had only one interception on Saturday, which again we controlled a little bit with some play calling and things like that. We didn't want to, certainly with the way our defense was playing, we didn't need to push them all that much, which we knew going in, and which we said all preseason that we're going to lean on the defense because they're a more experienced group. But he did a really nice job and led us on I believe it was 16 plays. I don't even remember the yardage, but he capped it off with a touchdown. I spoke to someone after the game and I said just a gutsy, certainly in the fourth quarter, just a gutsy performance by him, certainly in the fourth quarter, with when we had to grind it out and hold on to the ball and be smart with the ball. A lot of young quarterbacks, could have done bad things with it, and he even had a drive in a 2-minute situation before the half. We went and kicked a field goal on and got some points. We didn't have anything and he threw it right away. Those types of things, are, they sound real easy, but for a guy in his first start at quarterback, it's not that easy, and so he did a really nice job managing himself and the football to not turn it over, which is the most important thing to do in a game.
Perhaps the biggest breakout performance on the defensive side of the ball in Week 1 in the PAC came from a member of the Bethany secondary.
We really didn't talk about him much preseason-wise, but obviously after Saturday, he broke a school record with 3 interceptions. It's Dalton Freeman, so had a great game. We moved him to free safety, allowing him probably to freelance a little bit more, I guess you could call it, but just got great ball skills and did very well there on Saturday. So,
turnovers were the story in Bethany's Week 1 win over Ursinus. But last season, turnovers were often the story in Bison losses. Bethany threw a conference-high 18 interceptions and finished -11 in turnover margin, and took a step back to a 4-6 overall record in 2015.
From my standpoint, as the play caller, making better calls, and not putting the offense in a situation or the quarterback in a situation to do that, and I definitely did that at times last year. So those are the things that we discussed in the off season and look at and try to see what we did. There's no question. If you look at our points per game a year ago on defense, we were a lot better than that, and it was probably more on the offense from a turnover standpoint of putting them on the field too much, and honestly, where those turnovers also happen, more than maybe the number of them, but where they happen and what part of the field they happen on. So there's no doubt that was certainly, if a few turnovers here or there last year, and we may be have 2 more wins for sure.
Bethany's opponent in Week 2 are the Geneva Golden Tornadoes. Geneva struggled in a Week 1 loss against Frostburg State, but the game is a 7 o'clock kickoff at Reeves Field, where the Bison have won just once since 2007.
I hope as a program, and I don't think we're there anymore, of taking teams for granted in this conference. I mean, I think we've been through a lot. Certainly this group of players that we have right now have been through some of that, of maybe losses that we shouldn't have, the last couple years, and sometimes you have to go through those growing pains, and honestly, it's my job to hopefully minimize those, obviously, as much as we possibly can. And it's going to be a really nice atmosphere. It always is there at nighttime. They got a new offense that's, hard to prepare for, that nobody else runs in this conference, and we haven't seen in a long, long time. Our focus, which we talk about all the time, but better be on point and ready to go, honestly, no matter who we're playing, because everybody in this conference will be good enough this year to beat every single person, every team. So, again, the parity's never been better in this conference. So, you got to be ready to show up and play, and, including Geneva. I mean, we're have lost to Geneva when 2 or 3 years ago when they had 1 win. So, and there are guys on this team currently who went through that. So that shouldn't really ever be an issue for us right now.
Bethany didn't have to open up the playbook for its new quarterback with such a dominant showing from its defense in Week 1, but Coach Garvey hopes to see progression from his offense in Week 2.
When we get a chance to throw the ball down the field, do it, which, we did not take a whole lot of shots down the field on Saturday, but with the way our defense was playing, we don't need to right now. If the score is 16-15, and nobody cares, we win. So, we're not worried about how many points we score as long as we have more than the other team. But again, we want to be able to get the ball down the field, certainly a little bit more than we did, on Saturday.
Last season, Bethany lost to only teams that finished the year with a better record and beat every team that finished with an inferior record. After being picked to finish in the middle of the PAC again this season, Coach Garvey points to consistency and turnovers as the keys to moving up in the conference.
Yep. I mean, just consistency week in, week out, consistency. That's all we've been talking about in the off-season camps. Just be consistent in everything we do, effort-wise, focus-wise, and never lose it. It's, and number one thing is take care of the football, which we did not do a great job of a year ago. So, again, if we do that in a couple of those games, certainly I think things could look a lot different for us.
Thanks to head coach Bill Garvey and Bethany College for being featured on the PAC Football Focus. Coming up next week, we'll focus on Grove City College and first-year head coach Andrew DiDonato. Stay tuned for the PAC Pregame Show here on pacathletics.org.
I'm Joe Anderko, Commissioner of the President's Athletic Conference. Want to know what makes the PAC so special? Here's a few reasons why.
Comprised of 10 private institutions and 2 affiliate members, the PAC remains unique in this era of high-pressure college athletics. Now sponsoring 21 sports as it celebrates over 60 years of competition, the PAC is regarded as one of the elite NCAA Division III conferences in the nation. Our student athletes excel in athletics as well as the classroom, with numerous postgraduate scholarship winners, over 150 academic All-Americans, and over 900 academic honorable recipients with a 3.6 GPA or higher in the past year alone. Want to learn more? Visit us at www.pacathletics.org or follow the President's Athletic Conference on social media.
Academic and athletic excellence since 1955, the President's Athletic Conference.
We're back with the PAC Pregame Show here on week 2 at pacathletics.org. And in this week, I'm joined by two other Waynesburg University students, Austin Anderson and Brendan Keany, fellow seniors here at Waynesburg. And guys, thank you for joining me. And before we delve into week 2 of PAC football action, let's take a look back at week 1. Does anything stand out? In particular, anything surprise you from the first 11 games?
Yeah, I think Thomas More losing to Franklin was something that stood out. I think that was the game of the week, as you were kind of dubbing it, Andy, before the first week of games happened. And sure enough, Thomas More collapsing on the defensive side of the ball late in the game, which caused Franklin to get that victory. And it's probably going to allow Thomas More to not get an at-large bid if they were to lose to W&J later on in the year. But, of course, they have still a really good shot of winning and getting that automatic berth via the conference title. So I'll be interested to see how Thomas More progresses from here, but definitely a demoralizing loss.
Yeah, I like your points on all sides, Anderson. One thing I do want to mention is that Thomas More was up 25-7 at one point in the game, so they really did crumble. Obviously, it's a long season. Week 1, out-of-conference loss is nothing to get too worried about, especially since Thomas More won the PAC last year. I would still consider them to be the front runners to win it all again this year. But one game I want to point out is Case Western destroying Chicago 45-17. Last year, Chicago got the better of Case Western in week 1, and that was a ranked Chicago team. Case Western was one of the better teams in the PAC last season, and I think this game just goes to show that they will be at the top once again this year.
But I think to counter that, though, too, I mean, Chicago, towards the end of last year, Carnegie Mellon really turned on the gas and gave a good shellacking to Chicago later in the year last year as well. So, yes, Carnegie Mellon was improving, but Chicago could have been on the downturn, which could lead into this year, too. But, yes, a statement nonetheless, a big victory. You also have to factor in the 6 hours of travel for Chicago to Cleveland. So, but definitely a strong case for a very solid victory there for Case Western.
A couple of teams I want to highlight are St. Vincent and Grove City. Even though it was a loss for Grove City, what Brett Laffoon brought to the table for the Wolverines and first-year head coach Andrew DiDonato can't be understated. That team has been searching and searching and searching for a quarterback these last couple of seasons. And that performance was outstanding for a player in his very first game. And there's been a long track record of PAC quarterbacks. And in their first season, it really is a challenge in this conference with only very few exceptions at programs like W&J or even Rob Kuda last season. And I have to highlight Derek Stewart of St. Vincent as well. School record 424 yards through the air, 5 touchdowns, your PAC Offensive Player of the Week. And I was really impressed with St. Vincent's victory on the road against Alma. And let's just jump into week 2, shall we? And we'll start with a team we're very familiar with the Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets traveling to Westminster, New Wilmington, Pennsylvania for a 1 o'clock kickoff with the Titans. Last season, it was Westminster beating Waynesburg 24-7. After a first half that was really controlled by the Jackets most of the way, Waynesburg had the ball up 7 in the first half, had a touchdown called back, and then Westminster was able to get a stop, score, have the game tied at the half, and Demetrius Bentley, a 53-yard touchdown catch in the third quarter, really put the game up for Westminster, and then the Titans put it out of reach. And Jerry Lawman was the best thing for the Jackets in that game, 137 yards rushing, 5 yards a carry, but only 261 yards of total offense for Waynesburg, the lowest scoring output last season for Waynesburg, and it was Demetrius Bentley, Dominic McKinley, getting the better of the Jackets. Jake Doherty, 16 for 27, 144, 1 touchdown, 1 interception on the day. Not a great outing for him in his first look at this Westminster defense. Guys, I open it up to you. Jackets, Titans against in New Wilmington, where the Titans have been very, very good these last few years.
They certainly have, and a Westminster team which, bouncing off after a 9-win performance last year, now really having an opportunity to really step up even further. They were ranked in some top 25 on some polls that I was seeing earlier and receiving votes in some of the more established polls out there. So definitely a tough test for Waynesburg, traveling to New Wilmington, the distance there, and going onto the turf of Westminster overall. Waynesburg in their first week, they fought, but it definitely was an underwhelming performance by many considered for that game, not beating a team that you've beaten the last 4 years. The Jackets are going to try to bounce back here. And Jake Doherty, I thought he looked a little bit more decent last game than he had somewhat in last year. Coach Shep is giving him the green light to go ahead and throw deeper, and I thought there were some opportunities. Sure, there were some drop balls in the secondary by the receiving core, and that definitely what caused some struggles offensively overall. But I thought Doherty played decently well, and I look for him to continue that. But Westminster, a very stout team overall, is definitely going to be a tough test.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing that I keep thinking of is Westminster just put a licking on Hiram the other day, 40-0, and it wasn't even close statistically either. Obviously, 40-0. Total offensive output for Westminster: 449 yards to Hiram's 174. That's incredible. They only allowed 48 yards on the ground. And that is one thing for me to keep an eye on for this game between Waynesburg and Westminster. Waynesburg had a very difficult time outside of the 42-yard run by Ciro to get anything established in the running game. And to go up against a team in Westminster that only allowed 48 yards, that's going to look like more of the same. It's going to have to be Jake Doherty creating something with Kevin Barnes and Tim Cooper. And Kevin Barnes was shut down last week. So was Tim Cooper. Mitch Kendra had a good day. But can you rely on him on a week-to-week basis to produce those kind of numbers? I don't know. And another thing I want to take a look at, Westminster had 265 yards rushing, and that will probably be the matchup of the day. How will their rushing attack go up against Waynesburg defensive line, who played exceptionally well against Muskingum on Saturday, but it might be a little bit too much for the defense to handle. I do like Waynesburg's defense. They played solid against Muskingum. Do remember that one of the touchdowns Muskingum scored was after a turnover inside the Waynesburg 20. So kind of a pass on that. And then, of course, it was the 50-yard bomb down the sideline for the other touchdown for Muskingum. So, I mean, those are two plays that kind of like, okay, those things happen.
And how about that front defensive four for the Jackets? I mean, their defense overall played very good, but defensively up front, Zach Machuga leading the way up front. A really solid defensive effort there. We were expecting that from the Jackets, and sure enough, they did show up. So that's the one really good bright spot coming out of the first week.
For Waynesburg, that defensive front you mentioned, it's 7 sacks, leading the PAC through week 1. Brad Grinnan, you want to highlight a guy on the Jacket defense, 5 tackles, 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, a safety. And when we talked with Coach Shepis earlier in this week, he called Zach Machuga's game 8 tackles, 3.5 for loss, a sack. The best game that he's seen Machuga play here as a Yellow Jacket. And honestly, guys, I think this game might be shaping up to be a defensive battle, should both defenses show up and play the way they did in week number 1. Waynesburg finished week 1 as a top 3 scoring defense, total defense, rush defense, pass defense, and in opponent first downs and third down percentage. However, Westminster ranks better in every category except run defense and third down defense. Through week 1, which is an extremely small sample size, and you can make your comments about how good of a team you think Hiram is, how good of a team you think Muskingum is, but both of these defenses are certainly feeling themselves right now. And for the Jackets, it starts with the defensive line, but for Westminster, it starts with that secondary, where 3 of the 4 returners are all PAC. It starts in the middle with Matt Quinn, and it goes from there. I do want to highlight, as you said, Brendan, Mitch Kendra with the breakout game for the Yellow Jackets. 4 catches, 111 yards, 112 yards and a touchdown. A 52-yard pass was the longest of Jake Doherty's career, and when Coach Shepis was talking all this preseason about cutting him loose, that's what we imagined. But when you talk about guys like Kevin Barnes, a top 10 receiver in every statistical measure last season, and Tim Cooper, the number 2 for this Yellow Jacket team for a couple of years now, 4 catches for 36 yards might not get it done, especially against a Westminster team that has a big play threat in Demetrius Bentley, who last week took the opening kickoff back for a touchdown. Last year broke the game open for Westminster with a long touchdown. And really, this is a Westminster team that didn't have to pass the football. You mentioned the rushing yards, Brendan. When you look at 265 yards on 5.3 yards a carry, and McKinley, Colombo, Grice, Hill all run for touchdowns, and Colombo is efficient, that is a formula for success for Westminster. The Titans finished 9 wins last season despite having the worst passing game in terms of yards per game a season ago. And now here they are, 11 for 16, 184, no interceptions, 2 touchdowns. That seems like the perfect day for Paul Colombo and Coach Scott Benzel's team. Coach Benzel doesn't need Colombo to go out and throw for 300 yards like some of the other quarterbacks in this conference did in week 1 and are asked to do week after week after week. And being efficient, being a game manager, even though that has a negative connotation, I think should he do that, this defense gives Westminster a chance to win week in and week out. And I'm very concerned for this Jacket running game against the Westminster defense.
And another thing that I wanted to point out is that situationally, Waynesburg's offense did a very poor job. You remember their long drive of the game. It started on the 2-yard line, which is kind of interesting that that's the best drive of their game. But there were 4 consecutive series in the second half where Waynesburg started at their 40-yard line or better and did not put any sort of points on the board. You could make a case that Waynesburg should have put the game away in the third quarter, early on in the fourth quarter, but the offense couldn't get it done when they had a short field, which is extremely concerning for Jake Doherty. And, I mean, there were a couple drops here and there by Kendra, which you can't really fault him because he had such a good game. You're not going to put that on him. But the running game was poor, and Jake Doherty is not at the point in his career where he can carry the offense. He needs support in the running game, and like you said, Andy, I don't think that a game against Westminster, that's where you're going to open that up.
Yep. An inexperienced offensive line for the Jackets with a couple of freshmen starting as well as freshmen dotted throughout that backfield. But we'll move on to our second matchup, another 1 o'clock kickoff, this one taking place in Bridgewater, Virginia. Thomas More traveling to take on the Bridgewater College Eagles. Thomas More opened the season as the number 11 team in the country, according to D3Football.com, and is one of 3 teams still in the top 25 despite a loss in 3-1 in week 1. Thomas More lost at Franklin College, now a top 25 team, 43-39, a game in which Thomas More led 25-7 late in the first half. Franklin drove 65 yards and scored with 34 seconds left to cut that lead to just 11 before the half. And Thomas More still an 11-point lead early in the fourth quarter. Franklin scores twice to take the lead. Thomas More fumbles inside the Franklin 5-yard line, and then Franklin takes over, converts a fourth down with a pass interference penalty, and scores the go-ahead touchdown with 32 seconds to play. And on the other side, Bridgewater, a win over Gettysburg, 38-22 last week, in a game that wasn't really that close. Bridgewater led 31-0, and Gettysburg didn't score until the fourth quarter. So these are a couple of teams that certainly had impressive performances in some senses last week. Thomas More, the way it played against Franklin College, it was good enough to win against Franklin College. It didn't get it done. And then Bridgewater taking care of Gettysburg. What do we see in this matchup?
I think we're going to see an interesting game, to say the least. Bridgewater definitely has a tough non-conference schedule going past the last few years. Not a winning collegiate football team by many standards is in the win-loss column, but very tough strength of schedule if you look back the last 2 or 3 years. Thomas More having to make this long trip to Virginia to play this game. However, I think Thomas More overall will be able to bounce back and beat a team in Bridgewater. They're very solid and sustained, really a tactful offensive team. They're really well-rounded all on different aspects of the football field. And I think they can really succeed here in a matchup versus a Bridgewater team that did not have a winning record last year. And I look for Thomas More to try to get back on their winning ways and really improve the record. They're still a top 25 team in Division III, and I'm looking for them to continue those ways moving forward.
Yeah, I think one thing you need to highlight is the passing game of Franklin last week.
Oh, outstanding.
Yeah. Case Burton, 51 of 67. 67 passes in D3 is crazy. 514 yards. 5 touchdowns. Of course, he threw 3 picks, but when you throw 67 passes, I mean, that's bound to happen. Here's the thing that would worry me a teeny bit for Thomas More. They gave up significant big plays. Plays of 26 yards, 56 yards, 28 yards, 25 yards. And of course, the PAC is not filled with quarterbacks that can have this kind of performance on you. However, when you get to play some of those quarterbacks later on in the season, I'm talking about Case Western, perhaps W&J. Coughlin had a very good game in week 1. So that's a little bit concerning, especially when C.T. Tarrant had a phenomenal day as well. 208 yards on 28 carries. He had 2 touchdowns. And in all, Thomas More had 279 yards on the ground. Their ground game is on point, but I'm a little bit worried about their pass defense at the moment.
I would agree with that because of, we talked about the senior losses of Thomas More last week. 20 seniors moving on. Over half of them were all conference. 10 of them were either first or second team. And 2 of those guys, Ian Gunn, Trey Wells, all PAC first team defensive backs. That is a spot that Thomas More really lost some very talented players. Another position I point to, the wide receiver spot. Goose Cohorn is one of 3 guys you could argue was the top receiver in the PAC last year, up there with Zubik and Eric Blinn of Bethany. And they have solid receivers that put up nice numbers yesterday, but Cohorn had a monster year last year. Tyler Vogelpool had a monster year last year. And you look at Brendan Coots, the quarterback now taking over for Jensen Gebhardt, 14 for 28, 201, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. That's nice. Matt Batustak, 6 catches, 73 yards, a touchdown. That's nice. Dalen Garland, 4 catches, 56 yards, and a touchdown. That's nice. But against a passing game and an offense like Franklin College, it'll take just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. And I think it's still a work in progress, especially in that passing game in Thomas More. Talking to Coach Scaife last week, the strength of that football team is the running game, and you saw it. You mentioned it, Brennan, C.T. Tarrant, 7 yards a carry, a couple of touchdowns. Javier Pitts, 7 yards a carry. He's the one who lost the fumble, but it happens. I don't think, as you made the point, that Thomas More will see a passing game like Franklin College's. Chase Burton was the offensive MVP of the HCAC as a sophomore last year, threw for 3,800 yards last year, which is outrageous for a college quarterback. So I understand the growing pains for Thomas More. This was a winnable football game for the Saints. Defensive back Johnny Lamers, 11 tackles, an interception with a big return, 2 pass breakups. Linebacker Trey Tunstill, 14 tackles. Awesome. Thomas More continues to reload on that side of the ball. But we'll see. We'll see. And this is a Bridgewater team that had a lot of newcomers come to it. A dual-threat quarterback in Brendan Maturi. Passed for almost 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Ran for another 100 yards. And I'm interested to see how Bridgewater uses its tight end. There aren't too many tight ends in the PAC like Keith Jennings, who reeled in 5 catches for 135 yards and 2 touchdowns and a 65-yard long. That's one position we don't see utilized as much in this conference for whatever reason. I'm interested to see in how Thomas More handles that. And defensively, Bridgewater held Gettysburg to 24% on third down, 4 for 17, and 6 punts, 1 turnover on downs in the first half. Bridgewater dominated Gettysburg. I don't know how good Gettysburg is or will be, but that has to count for something. And Austin, you made the point to travel. Bridgewater is over 400 miles away from Crestview Hills, almost a 7-hour drive, far and away the longest trip for Thomas More in this season.
But keep in mind, I thought that would be a storyline for St. Vincent last week at Alma, and it wasn't. So you never know with those situations.
And one thing, again, Andy and Austin, I was looking at the scores this week after Saturday, and I saw that Thomas More had lost, and I didn't even really bat an eye. Like, I was kind of surprised that they lost, but I saw how they lost. I saw they're still a fairly solid offensive team. The defense got run over a little bit, but you would much rather have this loss week 1 out of conference to start the season than later in the season for obvious reasons.
The margin for error, I think, was showed in this game, not having guys like Goose Cohorn or Eric Butler or their replacements established quite yet.
And you also have to remember, Franklin's a defending conference champion themselves.
Six-time defending conference champions.
They're definitely a workaholic team, and their non-conference schedule last year facing teams like Butler, they definitely make it a challenging conference for them to play. So it's not an easy game to travel on the road. Not a fairly long trip for Thomas More, considering it's closer than all their conference teams in the PAC, but a very tough competition game in Franklin, and they lost, and they deservedly did so with the way they performed in the second half, but this is a team that's going to bounce back very quickly, and watch for this Saturday for Bridgewater to be that team, I believe.
I absolutely agree, and we can move on and shift gears to our next matchup. It's Grove City traveling to W&J, a 2 p.m. kick in Washington, Pennsylvania. Last year, W&J won 55-7, led 21-0 after the first quarter, led 42-0 in the half, 55-0 after 3 quarters. Pete Coughlin did Pete Coughlin things, 20 for 22, 257, 2 touchdowns. But I'll say this. This isn't the Grove City team or offense that we've seen in the last 2 seasons. Grove City nearly picked up its first win since 2013 in a loss to Juniata in Week 1. Grove City held a 1-point lead in the fourth quarter. Juniata scored twice to take the 31-20 lead. Grove City scored from a 13-yard pass from freshman Brett LaFoon to senior Brett Pinson, and the defense got it stopped. Grove City down 5 with the ball, had it with 2 minutes remaining, drove down to the Juniata 18 before a holding penalty set them back. After the holding penalty, an interception doomed the Wolverines to a loss. But for Coach DiDonato, Brett LaFoon from Penn Trafford High School, great find. And W&J, of course, beat Worcester again, 58-20, fourth straight year putting up 50-plus on Worcester.
This probably isn't the week for Grove City to get that statement win, but they're definitely on the up and coming here.
For sure.
Brett LaFoon not only doing it in the air, 347 yards, 3 scores, 2 picks, but also on the ground game. He had 5 carries. He did lose 11 yards, and he had 21 yards per game. But remember, in the collegiate game, sacks do count for lost yardage of running. So you look at the situation, he still gained 21 yards on 5 attempts. Not a bad day for him. He also scored on the ground as well. And they had some really good receiving yards as well. Nick Panakavar with 179 yards and a score. Had a really solid game.
Your PAC Rookie of the Week.
Very, very good. And then you also look at the running game, not as solid, but definitely their passing game a lot better than it has been in the past. This is a totally different Grove City vibe, totally different Grove City team than years past. This is going to be a team that's going to win a couple conference games, in my opinion, and they're definitely going to show it. I definitely give W&J a very tough battle, but in the end, the Presidents are, of course, very solid team. Pete Coughlin last week, 332 yards and 4 scores, not throwing a pick. Just a very solid week there for Pete Coughlin. You're smiling over there, Andy. Just a very solid week for him. On the ground, they still have a lot of rushers despite cycling through running backs in years past. Austin Kemp getting 81 yards and 3 scores. Just really a solid team overall in W&J. Always in the top 2 or 3 in the PAC. This is going to be a tough matchup for Grove City. I like WJ.
And I actually I think that this game is going to go very similarly to the Worcester game, in which Worcester put up a fight for a little bit. I mean,
Worcester's 13-7 lead midway through the second.
Exactly. And, as we were getting score updates at the Waynesburg game, myself and Austin were looking at each other like, oh, maybe, upset. And then we see the final score and we're like, okay, that's more like it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar game like that this week between them and Grove City. Grove City, the problem that I have with Grove City, they only had 63 rushing yards last week, and they're going up against a W&J defense that allowed 12 rushing yards. That's going to be tough, and I don't think they quite have the quarterback play to make this a shootout kind of game, and that's what W&J's offense likes to do. They run up the score. They scored on 6 straight possessions, scored touchdowns on 6 straight possessions against Worcester. I mean, when that offense gets rolling, they're incredibly difficult to stop.
But from Grove City's perspective, keep in mind that this is not a conference game, and that's an encouraging thing for Grove City in the sense they can have this tough battle versus W&J and know in the standings it's not really going to take a hit on them in the conference standings, which is the most important thing, I think, if you're Grove City this year.
Week 2 last year, Westminster had a great fight against W&J, 35-31 in Washington, and Westminster didn't win that game, but springboarded from that effort to a 9-win season.
I think you can see something similar, maybe not 9 wins, but
not that extent.
But I think you could see a big stepping stone game for Grove City.
No, I think both teams showed exactly what you wanted to see in Week 1, except for Grove City not coming away with a win in the 2-minute drill. Brett LaFoon, 37 for 54. 54 attempts for a freshman in his first ever game in college. 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. The most prolific passing game the Wolverines have had in years. Set Grove City College single-game record with 34 completions, the 4th highest single-game passing effort in Grove City history, and the most yardage passed for by a Grove City quarterback in a debut. Shout out to Sports Info at Grove City. The new website looks excellent, by the way. I really dig that. And I do want to say for W&J, I know Coach Sirianni thinks that Pete Coughlin's the best player in the conference, and he said that. I've read that quote a couple of times. And Pete Coughlin played like it in Week 1. I mean, 330 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks. Wasn't sacked all day. Jesse Zubik played like the best receiver in the conference. 9 catches, 124 yards, 1 touchdown. And things went as planned for W&J. Barring the early part of the game, leading 13-7 was Worcester. W&J's offense failed on 3 different 4th down conversions early in the game, And then, as you mentioned, Brendan, 6 straight scoring drives that ended in touchdowns. W&J dropped a 30 spot in the third quarter. The third quarter of the game, 582 yards of total offense, 91 plays. They got to work with pace. I'm interested to see who rises to the top in that running game because Ryan Ruffing has been so good for so long. Now it's a committee of backs. Trevor Morrow, Justin Vickles, Austin Kemp, all got at least 9 carries, all ran for around 5 yards a pop. Austin Kemp, 3 touchdowns, and it's funny that Kemp comes from Thomas Jefferson High School, same high school as Ryan Ruffing. And then even it's funny because W&J is so good at so many things. Kick return game. Luke Meerhout returns of 38, 48, and 53 yards. Good field position all day. Defensively held Worcester to 0.4 yards a carry and really settled in after giving up 13 points in the first half, throwing a safety in the third quarter. I think there's plenty for both teams to be positive about coming off week 1. But for Grove City, I used the stat last week, and it will continue as long as it continues. At Cameron Stadium, W&J has a 19-game win streak. I'm not sure if the Wolverines can break that, but it's very, very hard to win in Washington, PA.
Oh, it most certainly is. I mean, that's definitely a tough environment to play in. Always one of the best drawing PAC schools in attendance. I mean, the way the stadium is built, it's encouraging for the fans to be involved with the game, and they most certainly are. Definitely a tough place to play, and there's a reason why W&J has been so successful there.
I do want to say this for Grove City. I think this is the year they certainly get some wins. Last year, close games with Geneva, Waynesburg, and Teal. And I think Coach DiDonato made a good decision, or really won in recruiting, to bring in some WPIAL guys. And that starts with LaFoon, who played at Heinz Field in a Quad A championship game against Central Catholic, a team that went on to the state final and championship there. I do, however, Brendan, you made this point, and we'll wrap up here quickly. The run game for Grove City. I'm looking for a step forward. Wesley Schools from New Jersey ran for almost 5 yards a carry in 7 attempts and caught also 7 passes for 44 yards out of the backfield. Maybe he's the answer. Showers back there as well in the backfield, but it wasn't a balanced attack for Grove City. 350 yards through the air, 60 yards on the ground. But still 8 for 16 on third down. That is absolutely a win. Grove City, I was really, really impressed. The receivers played well. Panikavar and Pinson, each catching touchdowns. And I'm looking forward to see what the Wolverines will bring to the table. And I know W&J is determined to bounce back after last season. Let's move again to St. Vincent taking on Teal. St. Vincent beat Teal 65-14 in the season ago. And for St. Vincent, beating Alma College, blowing out Alma College 47-24. Transfer quarterback Derek Stewart, 424 yards, 5 touchdowns, school record in terms of yardage, 1 interception. And then Teal scoring the first 27 points against Allegheny College in a 44-21 win over the Gators. Big wins in week 1. Lots of turnovers forced in week 1. What do we see in this matchup?
I think it'll be a solid matchup. I think Teal getting that big of a statement win is important. But I think St. Vincent's win week 1 is even more impressive because they traveled to Alma, a very solid team in their conference in Michigan. Just a solid performance by St. Vincent going on the road and nearly doubling up the point output versus Alma. Yes, Teal showed a lot of good significant signs pointing upwards, but I think as you look ahead towards this next game, I think St. Vincent is out to prove something. I think every year they seem to be on the rise, and it's something that you got to look at as a team that's definitely going to be a perennial contender this year.
And I think when I look at this game and a couple of the games that we've previewed in recently, is that you're seeing great things from each team thus far. You can say the same thing for Teal, who played very well against Allegheny, but St. Vincent even more so. St. Vincent has a very talented roster. And for them to get a guy like Derek Stewart, who came in his first game, as you mentioned, Andy, 424 yards, 5 touchdowns, and then to have the weapons around him to possibly make this a consistent performance. You have Damon Black, 10 receptions, 163 yards, 2 touchdowns. Shavante Kraft had 4 receptions for 94 yards. Dalton Dietrich, 5 receptions, 100 yards. They have the weapons and now the quarterback play to be able to perhaps play those high-scoring affairs against teams such as Thomas More, W&J, and I think that's going to be a little bit too much for Teal. And, you know, Teal is a team that has been a bottom feeder for several seasons now. But once again, much like Grove City, they put on a good performance in week 1. Teal did beat Allegheny last season. It's not like Allegheny is a great program by any means.
0-10 last season.
Exactly. But Teal did as well as you would want them to. You keep saying that, Andy. And I think one of the reasons is Ryan Radke. For only completing 8 passes, Radke had 148 yards and a touchdown. And then, of course, he's always able to do it with his legs as well. So for him to have that kind of efficiency in the passing game is a good thing for Teal. I don't think that gets it done against a St. Vincent team who is on another level compared to Allegheny.
I would say this about Teal College. I need to see more from Teal. Last season, beating Allegheny 37-21, a very similar score to this season. Ran for over 300 yards against Allegheny. Last week ran for 297 yards. Teal failed to rush for over 169 yards in a single game for the rest of the season. Kevin Daly ran for 115 yards against Allegheny last year and 172 for the rest of the season. I like a lot of the things that came out of the Tomcats in that game. You had young running backs really do a good job. 5 rushing touchdowns. Peyton Hicks out of Woodland Hills ran for a pair of first quarter touchdowns, 40 yards, 10 yards. Nick Barca, in his first game as a Tomcat, ran for 123 yards in a touchdown. James Lewis had 2 rushing touchdowns of his own, 6 rush, 93 yards, 2 touchdowns. Ryan Radke was the 4th leading rusher, which doesn't usually happen in the years of late, not since 2014.
And I think on the rushing game, what's impressive, I mean, Nick Barca had himself a really nice day getting 123 yards and a score. But you look at James Lewis and Peyton Hicks, their average yards per carry, 15.5 and 17.7 respectively, each with 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's positive notes. I mean, granted, you're playing a team in Allegheny, which isn't known for its football talent, but overall, I mean, that's a very impressive night for those 2 runners, as well as Barca. And you know what Radke can do on the ground. Teal definitely had some positive signs in their victory last Saturday.
I'd agree. And defensively as well, Coach Bloom is a defensive guy from all the places he's been before, Mount Union, Villanova, etc. Joe Krim, who made 1 tackle in 2015, led the team with 9 tackles, 2.5 for loss, a forced fumble recovery, a couple of sacks. As a sophomore, awesome. You got sophomore linebacker Doak Walker, 9 tackles, junior linebacker Jake Elk, a pair of interceptions, 106 return yards. That's exciting. Elk and Walker especially popped last year when we saw them in Waynesburg.
Absolutely.
And that Teal defense forced 6 turnovers, 4 red zone turnovers, fumbles on the first 3 drives of the game for Allegheny College, 3 interceptions. That's really encouraging to see in a win for Coach Bloom. But then we'll see. We'll see if they can carry that on. Deshaun Bracey out of Kiski Area High School, another Whitfield guy, caught 3 passes for 76 yards to lead Teal. And really, Radke hasn't had that big play guy he can count on since Marcus Johnson a couple of years ago when he won PAC Newcomer of the Year. But I do want to look at St. Vincent, 613 yards of total offense. Mm-hmm. Touchdowns on 4 of the first 5 drives, scored the first 26 points of the game. And you see under Coach Dolciato, really, he's been searching for that quarterback. 2 quarterback systems each of the last 2 seasons, really. And now they're in a situation where they think they have a guy. 4 different receivers all caught touchdowns. Damon Black, 10 catches, 163 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dalton Diedrich, 100 yards and a touchdown. Shavante Kraft, almost 100 yards. Best third down percentage in week 1, which is huge. Last year, St. Vincent, 27% conversion rate on third down, worst in the PAC. Week 1, 13 for 21, held Alma to 5 for 16, 31%. St. Vincent's defense did its job, had a goal line stand on the opening possession of the season. And talking to these coaches in the PAC, having moments like that are just huge. For a team and a defense and a unit to have something like that right off the bat. Westminster had it with its special teams running back the opening kickoff. But to get that sort of momentum, get red zone stops, one of 3 red zone stops on the day for St. Vincent. Alma was able to move the football, 418 yards of offense, almost 5 yards a carry. But St. Vincent rose to the occasion defensively, on third down and in the red zone. And I was really pleased with that effort. And I think St. Vincent, we were very high in them last year. St. Vincent might be in that Westminster case from last season, where that's a sneaky team and could have a chance of winning quite a few games in the PAC this year.
Especially, you know, I mentioned this before, especially with the quarterback play. If you have a really good quarterback in the PAC, you're bound to win games. That's just the way it is. And that's really at any level of the sport. If you have a good quarterback who can put up points, then you're going to win. And, we haven't seen this. We've seen this, The Waynesburg is going from a gunslinger like Carter Hill to Jake Doherty. Your offense gets kind of discombobulated a little bit. And then in St. Vincent's case, you had kind of poor quarterback play last year to be able to utilize the talent in your skill positions on offense and combine that with a guy who can throw the ball down the field. That is a team that can stick with a Thomas More and a W&J, and this is a team that should beat Teal next week.
Mm-hmm. Last year, Tyler Donahue, the starter for St. Vincent in the win over Teal, he ran for 270 yards and a touchdown. He was a very good mobile quarterback, but wasn't a dual threat to the extent that put him over the top in a way that Derek Stewart was in the passing game. Final thought there, Austin.
Just the receiving core for St. Vincent is just stacked. I mean, you looked at Shavonte Kraft and DJ Ocean Kelly, two of their top receivers weren't even the top two in yards overall or receptions for the Bearcats.
Oh, they
on
spread
Saturday.
it around.
They're spreading the ball around. Derek Stewart seems to be really settling in after splitting time last year with Shemensky overall, and just really a very solid effort for St. Vincent overall last week versus Alma, and I expect them to continue to do similar things versus Teal.
Now we turn to our featured matchup of the week. It's the Bethany Bison traveling to Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania to take on the Geneva Golden Tornadoes at Reeves Field, where Geneva's been so good traditionally, especially at night. Last season, Bethany won 41-15 in Bethany, West Virginia. However, many major playmakers from last season's meeting are gone. Eric Blinn, an 85-yard punt return for a touchdown, 117 yards receiving and a touchdown. And for Geneva, Nick Cook, 12 catches, 144 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's no longer with the team. Quarterback play was solid. Lincoln Reyes, Aaron Channing, both played well. Channing almost 300 yards, 2 touchdowns. Reyes turnover free, 272 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. However, neither are back. And so it's up to Jalen Holmes to try to repeat his performance from last year. 135 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns, 7.5 yards a carry. As far as week 1, Bethany with a win over Ursinus College, thanks to 7 takeaways by the Bison defense. Despite the takeaways, Ursinus scored early in the second quarter to cut Bethany's lead to 16-13, but then the Bison went on a 14-play, 63-yard drive spanning almost 6 minutes that ended with a Chase Keenan touchdown run on a 3rd and 8 to go back up by 2 scores. The defense came through again. Bethany 1-0 from the effort. And on the other hand, Geneva lost to Frostburg State 31-10 in week 1. The first game running an offense that no one else in the PAC runs and that Geneva hasn't run traditionally as well, the triple option. 44 running plays to just 14 pass plays, 176 yards rushing to 35 yards passing, 211 yards of total offense, only 4 yards per play. And Devin Kolowski was really the leader offensively, 115 yards on the ground. However, 77 of them came on just 1 run, a touchdown, the only touchdown for Geneva. So I'll open it up to you, gentlemen. Bethany traveling to Geneva, where the Golden Tornadoes have been very good. However, they've just won 1 conference game a season ago.
And I think you got to look at these teams. I think it's going to be a really good matchup between these two teams overall. Geneva losing to a really tough Frostburg State team, 3rd in the New Jersey Athletic Conference preseason going into this year. Just a solid team overall. You look at Bethany, they lost Eric Blinn, of course, and a lot of key people on their offensive side of things. They're looking for their defense to step up, which they certainly did against Ursinus. Now you got another test in Geneva, a PAC foe, despite it not being a conference game. The competition might be a little bit more tough. I'm looking forward to this matchup.
Yeah, it will definitely be a better matchup than last season. Geneva always has a solid defense. They played a very tough Frostburg State team. But what I want to see out of Geneva this week is more balance in their offense. 35 yards passing last week, 2 of 11, compared to the over 170 yards on the ground. And that's going to be tough to win games with a running attack that can get 170 yards when your passing game isn't quite there yet. And that's going to be tough against Bethany. And, as you mentioned earlier, Jalen Holmes is back for Bethany. He had another good game last weekend. It's going to be a tough time for Bethany, but I still think they have the tools to get the job done. But Geneva, as you mentioned earlier, Andy, is very tough at home, so you never know what can happen.
Obviously, the star for Bethany in week 1, the breakout guy was sophomore strong safety, now free safety, Dalton Freeman. 8 tackles, 1 for a loss, 3 interceptions. He was given the freedom to work in space and roam, and he certainly validated that decision by the Bison coaching staff. And then Donovan Hayden, your PAC Defensive Player of the Week, 10 tackles, 3 for loss, a 40-yard fumble return for a touchdown, and a pair of sacks as well for the senior linebacker. He's one of the top players in the PAC at that position. I was interested to see in who would be the starter day one for Bethany, and it's Chase Keeneman. Coach Garvey says they called a very conservative game, 180 yards, just 1 interception. And it was the interceptions that sunk Bethany time and time again a season ago. And taking care of the football was paramount, and he found Tyler Ambush. And he's a guy who hurt Waynesburg last season. We certainly know that. 8 catches, 75 yards, a solid day out of him. Jalen Holmes, 3 yards a carry, but got up to 85 yards and a touchdown. My question for Bethany is, what's the next step for this offense? You see 7 takeaways, 1 takeaway return for a touchdown, and then 5 others that yielded nothing. You had that big last drive, which was huge, a gutsy performance. Bethany came off an interception in its own territory, and it drove down the field and put the game away. And I was happy to see the turnovers for the Bison. Last year, only 13 takeaways with an experienced group that had 20 takeaways the season before. And last season, I certainly believe in the coaching staff of the Bison and Coach Garvey and his offense if they want to cut it loose. Lincoln Reyes, in terms of passing, was a top 5 guy in yards and touchdowns. It's just the interceptions that hurt this team so many times last season. And I think that Jalen Holmes has been low-key underrated in this conference for a long time. I think I was surprised to see that he ran for 1,300 yards and 15 touchdowns last year on 6 yards a carry. But the fact that he was in a conference with Sam Banger, who led the nation in rushing, a guy like Dominique Hayden for a couple of years, who was a multiple-time PAC Offensive Player of the Year, Ryan Ruffing with all the success W&J has had, I feel like he's sort of been looked over. And the fact that he went over 100 yards in every game except against Mount Union, Westminster, Thomas More, and then the last week of the year, I think that was outstanding last year. And having him back is such a luxury for this Bethany team moving forward.
I most certainly agree. I think Bethany offensively could use a little bit more improvement from week 1 into week 2. Only getting 133 yards rushing, and which isn't bad, but look, all things considered, there were 5 players factoring into that and 51 total carries. So that only was a 2.6 average yards per carry. And you look at the passing game, only getting 180 yards total with the interception, no touchdowns via the passing game. There's definitely some improvement that needs to happen there. I mean, Tyler Ambush had a great game receiving, 8 receptions for 75 yards. So I think this team needs to have a lot of improvement offensively, which was the question going in. We all knew this. But I think it's going to be something to watch for the remainder of the year.
One thing that Geneva can take advantage of is the fact that this Bethany offense punted 12 times in their first game. If you want to win this game, you can keep their offense off the field by forcing the short possessions, and that would be huge for Geneva. Obviously, you're at home. All you need is a couple big plays. They had a big play last week.
It's a ball control offense with all the running.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about Bethany's offense and how to have a guy like Jalen Holmes is a luxury. Holmes still only averaged 3 yards a rush last week. If Geneva's defense can keep Bethany's offense off the field, you have a really solid game on your hands.
For Geneva, passing on 1st and 2nd down, 1 for 5, 13 yards and a sack. Passing on 3rd and 4th down, 1 for 6, 22 yards and a sack. All 3rd downs were at least 3rd and 6. 5 were 3rd or 4th down of 11 plus. This is a new offense that teams need to get used to defending, but it's also new to Geneva's personnel as well. I look for this team to improve incrementally every single week. But concerning to me defensively for Geneva, 5 tackles for loss, no sacks, no forced fumbles, just 1 interception late in the game. Allowed Frostburg to score early, and that is a no-no with the kind of offense and the kind of game plan that Coach DeMarco and Geneva wants to do. Going down 2 scores certainly isn't what you're aiming for. Brendan, I liked what you said, trying to control the ball, stay at home, stay within 2 possessions, and I think this can be an especially competitive game. Both teams trying to tune up, and both teams, I think this is a game on their schedule. Bethany, they're trying to get on track, trying to get things figured out with a young offense, new team, see if we can get a win on the road here. And Geneva, what are the night games that we have against teams we have a chance of beating? And I think both teams have this date circled, and I think both teams will be ready to play come 7 p.m. in Beaver Falls. And gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We will return next week with Coach DiDonato in Grove City College as our PAC Football Focus on pacathletics.org.